you make me a cup of tea, white with no sugar? I do hope you enjoy this tea because it will be the last one I make because I'm the new CEO.
We had a patient that had a wire that migrated into the lung and collapsed the lung, which is something I'd never seen in my entire career.
And my dad died when I was very young. So mum was a widow at 28 with 7 children.
I've never had a female boss. I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I just don't talk.
How will your family manage when you're not there? My children will be fine. They won't starve.
My phone is on 24/7 and I get phone calls at 1 o'clock in the morning. That may be the only time the chicken ring.
You have to be the doctor your community needs you to be.
I just kind of turned around and said, any other questions about my capability, or should we get started?
I would like to start with Emilia, Dr. Emilia. You have charted seas and you have charted a lot of research work in the science space. I would like you to talk about how has your intent to look for solutions to the problem you're facing, and you used a very good term while you were talking to me that you need to be the doctor what your community needs.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all of you coming to celebrate today. I think we have to start by looking back. I immigrated to Australia 11 years ago to the state of Queensland, and I really just came for an experience, a professional experience, to work in a different health system than the United States, and it was only intended to be for 3 years, and now it's been 11 years and I'm a citizen. I need to learn all the verses of the national anthem. So I developed a procedure 20 years ago in the United States that I patented with my professor, which was a localization procedure for non-palpable breast lesions. I am a breast cancer surgeon. And when I immigrated to Australia, I wasn't able to get these seeds that I needed to replace a procedure that has been around for almost 60 years now. When you immigrate as a doctor to Australia, you're working in an area of workforce shortage. So I moved from a 730-bed hospital in Texas to, I don't know how big the hospital was, it was quite tiny, a boutique hospital in Gladstone. And I'd only visited Australia once, and that was in Sydney. So Sydney is a lot different than Gladstone. But when I moved to that community, I had to go back to doing things the way I had done previously, which was fine. But we had a complication as a result of the traditional procedure. And so that wasn't okay with me. And so I had to figure out a way to make the procedure safer. And somebody had put a brochure on my desk. So what I was doing previously was using radioactive seeds. And I didn't understand the journey of the patient in central Queensland, how it differed from metro patients. And so my patients were traveling, for hours to get a hook wire placed into the breast that could migrate. So we had a patient that had a wire that migrated into the lung and collapsed the lung, which is something I'd never seen in my entire career. I haven't seen it since. It's very rare. Somebody put a brochure on my desk for a non-radioactive seed that was developed in the UK, and to this day I don't know who put the brochure on my desk. But I called the company here in Australia, and nobody knew what I was talking about. The next thing, I got a call from somebody from New Zealand and then from the UK. The manufacturers flew from the UK to Gladstone and met with myself and the radiologist and the hospital administrators, and basically I was just looking for a solution for my patients. So we started using something called MagSeeds, which is a non-radioactive seed to replace hook wires. And it turned out that I was the first in Australia to do it in Gladstone. And the person who recruited me said, "Emilia, be careful, don't be a tall poppy." And I was like, what is a tall poppy? Like, I don't know anything. What's the obsession with puppies? We don't have that term in the United States. And I said, well, I'm not trying to be the first of anything. I'm just trying to help my patients here in my community. And years ago, I worked in Hawaii for 7 years on the island of Kauai. And when I went there, I said, I'm a surgical oncologist. I don't do this. I don't do that. I didn't train to do urology. I didn't train to do that. Well, when you're living on an island, which is similar to living in regional or rural areas, you have to be the doctor that your community needs you to be. So if you don't have certain skills, you better get them. You have to think outside the box. You have to find a solution. You have to deliver the care because you can't transfer everybody out all the time. Maybe because of weather or whatever. Maybe if you're on an island, there's no way to get them transported because you're surrounded by water or roads are blocked from floods or fires or whatever. So you have to be the doctor your community needs you to be, which is what I tell my trainees now. But I would say that that is for anyone working anywhere. You need to be, whatever profession you are, you need to be the best that you can at what you're doing in your community and servicing your community. So I developed the procedure and I've implemented it in about 10 hospitals, and it's now throughout Australia. And the good thing is that there's now other devices that compete with that seed, which is how you embed a new technology or a new procedure, is it has to be embedded. So you have to share your knowledge, you have to teach others, and then you have a ripple effect. So if I had held that just with my hospital, my community, I would only be helping my direct patients. By teaching other surgeons and offering it to other hospitals and putting it in both the public and private sector allowed for it to be shared more widely, and so it allows me to help more people indirectly.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dauway. Can I go to Jean? You have worked on beyond multiple boards, and you have from again healthcare and a community services / care sector mindset. How do you see from a board point of view when you are talking about clinical governance? You're talking about risks as an organization would take when they are serving vulnerable Australians. What are the things or a mindset which goes through your mind, and what's your process?
That's a complicated question, isn't it? Thank you. Before I start, can I just say what Emilia said about regional and rural parts of Australia is so true. I've worked most of my life in Queensland in rural and regional, and the difference between healthcare and community services in rural and regional Australia and metropolitan Australia is stark. You talk about the advances in medicine and it's all wonderful, but if you live in a rural or regional part of Queensland, to be able to get the care you need either involves enormous amounts of travel, or you don't get it, or there's nobody there. So what Emilia said about healthcare, I would hope resonates with everybody and acts as a beacon for people to start thinking about the inequity in healthcare and community services. And those people who work in rural and regional, I know my biggest job, I think, when I did that, was just to keep banging the drum about rural and regional. You know, I would go to the opening of an envelope if it gave me the opportunity to say, guess what, there are people living out here and they're the backbone of what happens in Australia. And I was reminded with the poem, there used to be a group of women out in far west here, and they used to have a festival which they called Diamonds in the Dust, which I think is just a lovely term, and we should remember that about women in the West. What was the question you asked me? I can't even remember. Well, I really feel passionate about that, and it's something I've been doing for years, and it doesn't get enough airtime.
Thank you for your opening remarks.
Sorry, but you asked me about boards, didn't you?
Yes. You are, as in from healthcare and community services, you're multiple boards, and when you are thinking from a clinical governance point of view, typically people think about governance as board governance, but when you are on the board of care organizations, you need to think about clinical governance. So could I ask you to delve on the mindset to be, when young people here want to be on boards and they're volunteer positions on multiple boards, so what kind of a mindset one should go with? Well,
there's two questions there, one about clinical governance, and clinical governance is a totally different sort of governance where there is a large amount of risk. So if you're on a board which provides clinical services, your biggest issue is around risk mitigation, training, ensuring that you have the right people in the right place to provide clinical governance. You have a good clinical framework. So those are the things you have to look at. And accidents always happen. There are occasions when things go wrong, so you have to have strategies and leadership to make sure that doesn't happen. The other question about younger people who want to be on boards, and I was talking about this to Sally Ann before, things have changed. In my day, because I'm probably older than anybody else in this room, in the past, if you had a volunteer not-for-profit board, you were really struggling to find people who would give up their time and expertise. These days, boards are considered a career progression. We've changed the way we work. Nobody wants to work full-time anymore. Nobody wants to go into an office full-time anymore. They want to spend time working from home, preferably on a 4-day week. So the tenure of work has changed, and the tenure of ageing has changed. You know, when I was a girl, once you got to 65, you were practically gone. I mean, that's why pensions came in at 65, because governments expected you to last only 2 or 3 years, so they wouldn't have to pay out for much longer. Nowadays, at 65, you know, we're travelling, we're flying planes, we're volunteering, we're hiking the mountains, which is what Emilia's just been doing. So, I mean, the tenure has changed. So when you come to retirement age, what's supposed to be retirement, people are still energetic and want to give back. They might have 40 or 50 years of working experience. They want to come back. So I looked, because I knew you were going to ask me this question, I actually had a look at a couple of LinkedIn jobs for board members. Volunteer board members, so you're not getting paid, you're giving up a lot of your time, you're bringing with it a lot of expertise. The list of things that the organisations wanted was huge, so especially legal, accounting, so they get free legal, they get free accounting, they want you to fundraise, which means you probably have to donate as well, so et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this goes on, and I'm thinking, well, you know, nobody's going to want to do that. And I had a look 2 days ago, I think. There were 100 applicants for these board positions. So board work is not what it used to be. It's a very highly competitive area of career development. So if you want to be on boards, you have to start really early, and you have to start thinking about what is it that I can bring? And very often it's youth. Very often just the fact that you're young and you think differently from old chooks like me makes you more attractive to a board.
Thank you. May I also ask everybody to go use the QR code, go on Slido, and please ask the questions and have a read if there are any questions, and do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Yasmin, I want to go to you from there. You are supporting women with a lot of inequities and challenges, and they're vulnerable in many ways or forms. May I ask, how has your purpose of doing that evolved to that stage that you want to help? And you were talking about, as a young girl, how you were supporting people. And could you tell us that story, please?
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Just a quick shout. I'm going to do a preamble like Jean did. Shout out to my Muslim sisters who sat in a breakfast and didn't eat. Thank you very much. It's Ramadan. We're all fasting. Look, as any first-generation migrant would tell you, my mum's from Pakistan, although I was born and bred in Queensland, and sixth generation on that side, but on my one side is my mum, and my dad died when I was very young. So mum was a widow at 28 with 7 children. So this is really, in effect, her story. But as being the eldest, and you're going to school and you can read and write, you can speak English, as any child of a migrant will tell you, you're the educated one. You're the one that can fill in all the forms. You're the one that can do all those things. So this idea of me helping in the community and working in the community has just been, It's just expected because I was the one that could go and read and fill in forms. I mean, like I said, my mum was young. She had 7 kids. She was a widow and just about fell apart. So I was, the one left in charge of looking after the kids, and I would speak to bank managers, and I would speak to, the electricity board, and I would speak to a whole heap of different people to get things done because that was the capacity that we had. So any first generation, second generation migrant will tell you that. Their parents come here, they can't speak English very well, they don't know the ways and means of getting around the system and the society. So you do what you have to do. So that's just progressed throughout my life, you just help those people that come along. There are probably hundreds of people in Australia that are here because I filled out their application forms. There are hundreds of people that are here because, that have got referrals from doctors and medical appointments and housing with the Housing Commission and Centrelink payments and various things because I filled out their forms. So those sorts of things are you just do what you have to do. And once you get to a position where you are the educated one and you are the knowledgeable one and you are the one that has the skills and the advocacy and the ability to do that, then you've got that's just what you've got to do to pay it back, because you've seen that environment of where people don't have the language skills, don't have that ability, and you've got to work your way through. So if you don't then use that advantage and that skill to then send that out to the rest of the community and say, yeah, I'm here for you. And I do that now. We run a domestic abuse service. We're an unfunded service. We're going into 15 years, unfunded, voluntary. My phone is on 24/7 and I get phone calls at 1 o'clock in the morning, and that's what you've got to do, because that woman has taken time out to find somebody that's going to be able to understand what she's going through, speak her language, and be able to speak to somebody at 1 o'clock because, again, it's like Emilia said, that's where she is at that time. That may be the only time that she can ring because she's controlled otherwise, or, the perpetrator's in the house with her and he's just gone to work. So you've just got to meet the people where they are at whatever time and whatever place they're at. But that's what you do. And, I'm not the only one that does that, but certainly that's just something that's inbuilt. And when you get to a position that you can take advantage of the system to help other people, then that's what you've got to do.
Thank you, Yasmin, for sharing that story. Ashley, I would like to go to you. While we were discussing, preparing for this conversation, you are a young engineer, you work in heavily male-dominated sector in the mining spaces, and you are a leader of a team, and you are managing a team. Could you share with us, your initial introduction to the room full of men, and then how do you engaged and interacted, and then how was the group dynamics?
So one of my previous roles, I was the first female supervisor in about a workshop of 600 to 800 men in central Queensland, and I was the gender diversity hire. The company I worked for at the time was very vocal. What I didn't realise when I said yes to the role, which was part of my own career development and where I needed to go in mining, I wanted operational experience, and this was the role for that. What I didn't realise at the time was I was taking over from a man that had a lot of respect and knowledge from the team that had been acting in that role for 2 to 3 years. So I was very much set up for success. So my team, I came in bright, shiny. An engineer, tradespeople do not like engineers coming in and telling them how to run things. And I was taking over from this person that had gone for the role and had not been successful. So it was very quiet at the beginning. The company had also decided to roll out some gender equality, respectful workplace training at the same time. And so I used to walk into the crib room and it used to be silent as soon as I walked in. And then I'd walk past groups of men and it would go silent. And so I kind of took this as, ooh, okay. And then I started to do one-on-one conversations with my team because I personally value a lot of career development and coaching and mentoring. And they all thought I was firing them because they've never had one before. So, but one of my team members said, look, I've never had a female boss. I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I just don't talk. And it was only at that point in time I realised where they were coming from. So it wasn't, they saw me as being different and they didn't know how to interact with me and didn't want to offend or be mean in any way. So the best way they saw it was just to be quiet. And so that was sort of one of the first challenges. And I was like, look, treat me like you would anyone else. And if you cross my line, it's okay. I will just tell you that that was my line. Let's push it back a bit. Never had to have that conversation with anyone. But I really realised I could, continue to be different and seen in this different life. But at the same time, I sort of had to come and be on their level and play in their same field. So they then saw me as an equal and that they could come to me, because I really strive on being approachable with my team members, particularly working in mining. Safety is the utmost important thing. And I really needed my team members to be like, hey, I've done a mistake, this has happened. So it was really important to me that I could build that relationship with them quickly and so that they felt like they could come to me at any point. And the other thing that I really noticed in that role outside of that was my peers were very different. I don't play golf. I do not fish. And so it was really hard for me to find my own peer support within that role because I couldn't bond on that level of hobbies. And so I really had to look outside of my organisation to find people that I could build sort of a bit of a supportive village network during that time. And there are people that you will not get on with. I was still 3 years into the role and still getting called fresh by one of my close colleagues, just as a bit of a reminder of, oh, you're still new, you're still learning. I was sort of like, I've got the highest performing team, we're getting the best results, but sure. So, just balancing those relationships. And then the other biggest thing I came up against was unconscious bias. So I was a key holder to a very safe, secure room, and you had to be accredited to get in there. And when people would come and be like, oh, is it all right if I can just borrow the key? I just need to go grab this piece of equipment, whatever. If I said no, I had guys that would physically, take a step back. And it was sort of this whole, oh, she must be in a bad mood type approach, where it's like if your supervisor, who was a white middle-aged man, was the general demographic of who my colleagues were, they'd just be like, okay, no worries, and move on. And so then it was this whole thing of, do I play into their unconscious bias or do I call it out? But if I call it out, then I'm seen as aggressive or disruptive and, really just bashing people down. So then it was like, how do I take them on this journey of changing their unconscious bias so they're physically not repelling themselves against me when I say no, was one of the other things that I really was quite a challenge in the role. So then it was, no, because of X, Y, Z, I hope you understand. And then at the same time, it's like, well, I don't want to lose my identity by playing into their unconscious bias, but at the same time, I'm not going to change their thinking moving forward for the next people that are in my role as part of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everybody, asking questions. And the question on the top is by Kathy. Jean, I would like to ask that question to you. As we explore how we balance the scales, how do these amazing high-achieving panel members balance pressure of work and life if women are expected to be caring and career-driven at the same time, all at the same time? Can we be both?
Yes, obviously we can be both. I was just listening and feeling really quite sad because I would have hoped that in this day and age I wouldn't have heard that conversation that, you were saying. I think that's just such a shame that we're still here, we're still doing this. And to illustrate your point about the balance, one of my roles that I had, I took on the role as CEO of the first Queensland Regional Development Board, and it was funded essentially by local government. So the interview panel was local government councillors. And there was about 6 of them, I think, all men except for one woman who was a friend of mine. So the interview's going on, and one gentleman said to me, So this job, Jean, will involve a fair bit of travelling. How will your family manage when you're not there? I have 4 children. So I said, oh, no, they'll be fine, they'll be fine. And I got the question again from another man. Yes, but Jean, you know, how are they going to manage if you're not at home? And I said, they're going to be fine. And so we went on. I got it again a 3rd time. And I said, look, my children will be fine. They won't starve. They'll be fine. What I didn't tell them was they probably would starve because my husband can only cook toast. So if I was away, the children would probably starve. But I went home and I said to my husband, who is an engineer, who's had a lot of jobs travelling, I said, has anybody asked that question of you? And he said, no, why would they? And I got that question 3 times. And the reality was the children didn't starve. My children are fine. I've been married since God was a boy for about 54 years. So you manage. You know, there are days when it's stressful and you think, how am I going to manage? But really, women are great at coping. We can do more than one thing at once. We can balance home. We can balance work. We're more in touch with how we feel, and when we're stressed, we might not necessarily do what we should do to manage it, but we do understand, and I think it's a question that you get, but it's something that we just do without thinking.
Because you're telling stories, can you also, the story you shared that with me, that somebody told you, chair of one of the boards told you that, hope you're not afraid of that sort. Can you please do the setting of the story, please?
Yes, that was a workshop. Have I got time to tell you another story about a friend? Because it's a much more interesting story. But the story about me was that I went to a workshop. I was the only woman in the room, which happened quite often. And this rather smarmy male facilitator, as I came in, he said, oh, Jean, I do hope you won't be overwhelmed by all the men in the room. Seriously. And I said, well, I do hope you won't be overwhelmed by the woman, and walked in. And, you know, but the more interesting story is a friend of mine. She was CEO of major agricultural organisations. She had a big reputation. She got a new job as CEO of one of the largest national agricultural organisations. First board meeting, all the board members arrived, all male. And one of them said, oh, hello, love, can you make me a cup of tea, white with no sugar? So she said she thought for about 30 seconds and she went and made the tea. And she brought it back to him. She said, I do hope you enjoy this tea because it will be the last one I make because I'm the new CEO. And she said it was worth every minute of that to watch him.
Great stories. Thank you, Jean. Can I go to Yasmin? This question is specifically on, for the first-gen immigrants, or even second-gen, there was a mention of tall poppy syndrome. And Emilia, either of you can answer. Did you experience cultural shock in Australia? If yes, how did you navigate that? Did you still find the 2 cultural parts of yourself in contest?
No, I didn't find cultural shock at all. I was born here. And I grew up in North Queensland, and it was a very cosmopolitan little town that had a Greek history and had a Italian history, had a Chinese history. So, and we just happened to be Pakistanis, or Pakistanis at least. But no, definitely I didn't find culture shock. I didn't find discrimination. There may have been some unconscious bias. I didn't see it because we were just all migrant kids, or all multicultural kids. We weren't all migrants. But we certainly were multicultural and we had ethnic backgrounds. But so sometimes I wonder about some of the stuff that's happening today and how that's played out, because growing up in the 70s and 80s, I just didn't experience it. And I just wonder what's changed over the years, that we've actually gotten worse around racism and discrimination when I thought we should have been getting better. So no, I didn't get it. Emilia would have had a culture shock, I'm sure.
Actually, I'm a bit, I guess, naive. I came to just work in healthcare for a few years. So I'm an accidental immigrant, so I never considered myself as a migrant. And then maybe some today, with all that's going on in the world, would maybe think I'm an accidental refugee. But I think that there's a lot of similarities between English-speaking countries, but the English was a culture shock, I think, because we use a lot of acronyms, a lot of abbreviations and things, and I would sit in meetings and I would be focused on an acronym. I'm like, what does that mean? And then, the meeting will proceed, and I'm still trying to figure out what the acronym was. I can make up really good words for all the acronyms. They're incorrect, though. And then I just finally would just stop the meeting and say, hey, I don't know what that means, because we speak a whole different language in healthcare and then with all the acronyms. So I think English, the Queen's English, American English, and Australian English are different English, and we I go back to, obviously I have an accent here in Australia, but when I speak to friends and family in the US, they say, oh, you're speaking Australian. No, I'm speaking English. So it's really funny, yeah.
Thank you. Ashley, there's a question for you from the floor. What do you say to people when they address you getting the role only to balance the gender scales? And question your ability and the right to be in your role.
Ooh, tricky. So not too long ago, I actually got to a meeting early, timely. Mining leaders tend not to be so timely. And that was my worst, well, not my worst mistake, but a mistake. There was a new guy who was leading one of the major contracting companies that we use. And then it turned into 20 questions about why I was here. And I think if there were tea and coffee facilities in that room, he was definitely thinking I was going to be there for that. And I always remind myself to take a deep breath first before I do respond, because I do start to boil up when I start to know what's going on here. And it was so did you go to university? What's your degree? What have you done? How long have you been in mining? Like all these things. And I couldn't even get, how about you? And say it back. But generally what I'm really lucky with in my role and where I work and in a lot of my previous companies is I'm surrounded by good people and colleagues that start to see it going on and can pull it up once they come into the room. But I think in the end, I just kind of turned around and said, any other questions about my capability? Or should we get started? They try to size you up and whatnot. And I look very different, and I'm rather young to be where I am up to as well. So I am sort of this mysterious thing that appears very bubbly and smiley and not what you're used to at 5 a.m. in the morning in high-vis. But when people do size you up, I think one of my big learnings from when I was a supervisor was pick your battles. You're not going to win all of them. And generally at the end of the day, you're just going to burn your own energy and your own mental state around it. So I had to deal with a colleague who was the one that called me fresh. But I had to walk into day shift, and he was the first person I had to interact with. And he was coming off night shift, his 7th night shift in a row, and we had to do handover. And so he was not in a good mental state then. And he was pretty much sitting in his role until he was going to retire in about 2 years. And, there were all these jabs at me throughout, like he'd sort of been prepped, and here I am at 4 o'clock in the morning, first one back after 7 days off, not quite in the right mental state to be responding to these jabs and picking it up. But at the end of the day, it got to a point of, I'm not going to be able to change his attitude, and is it really worth it when I could go and use that energy for the greater good elsewhere to change things? Because I did try to sort of change his attitude, and I tried different approaches, and there was just nothing going. But at the end of the day, I think it's pick your battles and also get a cheerleader in your corner if it's a particular meeting or interaction with a particular person and someone else attends that meeting. You can always be like, hey, have you observed this? I would really appreciate your support if you could help back me up by perhaps stopping it by saying this. type thing as well, as long as it's all respectful, but they're probably my points on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. Jean, I would want to come to you. Again, from the flow, what could we as a community do better for your sector, which is healthcare and care, or industry, and anything specific that government could do to balance the scales?
Okay, well, I'm in two sectors. So let me talk about Council on the Ageing first. Because one of the issues that we have is that we still have a huge amount of ageism in our society. Not just when you get old like me, but when you're young. You know, you're too young to do that. You won't have the experience. You know, you're too young for the job. And then as you get older, oh, of course, well, you're old, so you probably can't work a computer, and your probably mind's getting addled. So, you know, we need to do something about ageism, and that's something that we all need to do, to stop worrying about how old people are or how young people are. Just start worrying about how they feel, how they interact, what their experience and their skills are. So I'd really like to make a call out today to all these wonderful women in the room about ageism, to take ageism off the table. It's not important. People of all ages can do all sorts of things, and it doesn't matter if you're 5 or 50. So that's one thing I'd like to talk about, and I still can't remember what the other thing was. The questions are too complicated. Just ask me one question at a time. Okay. What was the other thing? The other one was around...
What's anything specific the government could do to balance the scales?
Yes, well, one thing government should do is not have short funding programs. The bugbear of my life is 3-year funding programs or even 1-year funding programs. So you work your butt off and you make this great program and you have great achievements, and then the government, whoever they are, federal or state or local, go, yeah, well, that was really good. Now we're going to move on to the next thing. So some longevity of funding programs would be great. I think that would make a huge difference. So people, when you talk about, especially in rural and regional, when you're trying to recruit, particularly healthcare people, wonderful people like Emilia, and you come in, they're looking for a long-term career, they've got their family, the children go to school, and then at the end of March, you start getting twitchy, will they fund this again for another contract? So I think that's what the government could do without question, all governments, to stop having short funded programs and recognise that if it's a good program, which it more than often is, let it run.
Mm-hmm. Emilia, from our conversations, we talked about when you were collaborating across public and private sector, and then your leadership, the way you were interacting, you were not thinking, just because I'm a woman, I should be feeling that way, but you were doing things and you were at that position because you were good and you were the first one innovating in a way. Could you talk about your leadership style when you work with multiple stakeholders, public and private both, and we're trying to create a positive outcome for communities?
I think this kind of ties into what she was saying as well. I think one of the unique things was when I came to this country, I didn't just work in the public. I was working in both private and public at the same time. I was hired by private as well as Queensland Health, which was quite unique because they had a Here for Health committee where it brought public and private leaders together in central Queensland, and that was a committee that was formed by Rio Tinto. And the reason they formed it was because they wanted to attract workers and their families to stay in central Queensland, and they needed to have stable, quality health care. So they recruited doctors, pediatricians, emergency doctors, surgeons like myself, to central Queensland and supported us in both private and public. So I got to learn both systems. We don't live in a time where public and private can exist independently as it has in the past. it has to be a collaborative effort because there are strengths and weaknesses of both. So working in the public, there's a lot of bureaucracy. That's one of the weaknesses, but the public allows for accessibility and affordability, whereas the private is much more efficient. So that having a collaboration, you can leverage the strengths of both. In terms of my leadership style, well, I was reflecting on where that came from, and I think I've been doing this since I was a child. I've always been trying to convince my friends that certain activities or certain things were the fun way to do things. One of my friends is there from 40 years. She's visiting Australia for the first time. We went to uni together, but so she can vouch for that. But I would say that, obviously there's different leadership styles, but my leadership style is definitely visionary and transformational leadership style. I like to mentor, I like to innovate and think outside the box, but I also am keenly aware that although I enjoy change, change is uncomfortable for many people. And Dr. Martin Luther King said, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he sits in times of convenience and comfort, but where he stands in times of controversy and challenges. And so I always think about that, and I always live by that because, well, we're currently in times of change and challenges for sure, but when healthcare is always changing because it changes along with society, and society, our humanity, we transition and we evolve. And so healthcare evolves with the changes in society. Diseases change. We're seeing diseases that were almost eradicated now are coming back up because of our changes in our beliefs around vaccinations or whatever. So healthcare is constantly changing, and change is inevitable. So how do we make change comfortable? Change is uncomfortable usually to people that benefit from the status quo. Change is uncomfortable for those who benefit from the status quo. But the opposite is true as well, in that there are those who want change, but may have an agenda that they benefit from as well. So it needs to be a win-win. So is the change something that is for the greater good? And so when I'm looking outside the box and trying to innovate different models of care that's going to benefit not only patients, our community, but how does it benefit those who are delivering the care? Because healthcare, working in healthcare, is hard work because people are sick 24/7, day and night, in the middle of the night, weekends and public holidays. So we all in healthcare, no matter what you're doing in healthcare, somebody has to be there. And we need to balance the well-being of our workers in healthcare so that our cups are full so that we can provide the care to the communities that we live in and ourselves we're going to be patients in. I think I went off track, didn't I?
That's fine. I think you still covered a fair ground.
But just to sum it up, I would say public and private together, we need to have sustainable funding, good governance, and accountability.
Thank you. Thank you, Emilia. Yasmin, you're observing one of your faith practice today. We could see that in action. And how has your purpose and leadership evolved? And how has the faith grounding have led to what you feel about leadership and what the work you do?
Look, I'm not here to preach to anybody today, but yeah, I mean, faith is very important to me, and it sort of underpins everything that I do. But it's also about there's a saying, I think, is that managers do the right thing, but leaders do things right. And I think we need to do things right. Sometimes we've got to play outside the box. We've got to colour in outside the lines. We understand where the guidelines are, but it doesn't mean to say that we can't go outside every now and then. And I think we need to understand sometimes you need to, work through the system and see how that affects people and how we can be a little bit more flexible, how we can be a little bit more creative and try to get the best outcome for the client or the community or, the society as a whole. And I think we need to understand how that works. And at the end of the day, it's about you going home and saying, okay, I did something good for whoever needed that help at that time. But that comes from my faith. That comes from understanding that we're all answerable to our higher power, and we do the best we can because that's how we're going to be judged. I'd rather be somebody that plays outside the sandbox but get the results for clients and the community, rather than somebody that conforms to the guidelines and says, oh, well, you know, I can only go this far. No, you need to go to the nth degree, because the person asking you for that doesn't have that capability to do that. And if you've got that capability, then you have a responsibility to make sure that you've done whatever you can to get as far as you can. And if that means that, you know, we stand up in court for clients and speak on their behalf, then that's what we've got to do. We're not even lawyers, but we do what we have to do. And we push the barrow, and we've got to do that because you're working with people that don't have that capability. And when they don't have that capability, they shouldn't have to be disadvantaged for that. And they should be recognised for their own agency, and whatever agency and capabilities they have, we need to be able to support that. And one of the things I want to talk about, that poem that you read out, it's a great poem, but it's a white woman's poem. There were no black women in that poem, and those black women are living in the West, and they've had to go through further hardship than the white women ever did. So we've got to recognise that you know, we've got to understand the diversity that we have around us, and recognise that we can be on a track to do the right thing, but who are the people that we're leaving behind? And I think that's what we need to keep an eye on, and that we've got to, when we talk about in Australian anachronism, a saying is, you know, does it pass the pub test? I think we've got to ask that question about how does this affect the weakest person in our community? And I think if we keep that focus, then we're going to go all right. But at the moment, we seem to be ignoring the weakest people in our community, and that's unfortunate.
Thank you, Yasmin, and thank you for pointing that out and reminding us. Ashley, you also talked about your evolution of your leadership style, and you used the term quiet leadership, and then you have a little one at your house as well. How does that leadership work when you're balancing the scales?
Yes, I've got a 4-month-old daughter at home, and quiet leadership's not her style. She came out screaming, and that scream is the loudest thing in the world. But I definitely consider myself more of a quiet leader. I sort of like to guide people to get to the result that we need to, and so that they can sort of continue to learn and develop themselves. My current role is in the business improvement space. What that means is I am the person you never want to see in your job, because I come in to fix problems, whether that's safety related, sustainability, or productivity. So I have to build relationships quickly and get people to trust me so I can work with them to help solve that problem. But generally I'm quite lucky people at work haven't quite clued on that's what I am there to do when I work with our operational teams yet. But, you know, I need them to be honest, and I need to be able to work with them. But I very much recognise I am not the expert on what they do. They are the expert. I'm just there to help us get out of seeing the trees and be able to look down at it from a forest perspective. So, you know, asking the right questions, taking them on the journey. I always really strive to be approachable as well, so that people can be like, hey, we haven't considered doing this. What do you reckon? And can come to me about it, particularly in the safety space, which is always extremely important in mining.
Yes.
Yeah, can I just something that Jasmine said, for the people in this room, the largest cohort of people who are suffering homelessness are women over 50. So just a reminder that, you know, when you're talking about leaving the vulnerable behind, and we talk about the housing shortage, the largest number are women over 50. And if you think about a couple on a pension, one of those people passes away, the remaining member of that couple then has their pension halved. So the rented place that they were in before, they now can't afford, and they're living in their car. Just a reminder that, you know, there are, as Jasmine
and a huge majority of those women over 50 who are homeless are there because of domestic abuse.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us. I want you to conclude, Jean, your remarks on balancing the scales. You have used different strategies in different rooms you were in. So from that idea of different strategies of leadership you have used, and how do you concluding remarks on the idea of balancing the scales?
Well, I think from a leadership point of view, and I thought about this a fair bit, it's really about a team. A leader can only lead if they have a team behind them. And my approach has always been that, yes, as a leader, you're going to have to make the ultimate decisions. You're going to have to set a strategy. But the best leaders I've ever known are the ones that recognise that the people that they lead are all skilled and experts in their field, and you let them get on with it and you provide them with an environment. And if you do that, then that gives everybody the opportunity to be able to have a personal life and a work life. Nobody got to the pearly gates and said, oh God, I wished I'd worked more. So it's really just balancing how you approach it. And if you as a leader work and don't go home at night until 11 o'clock at night and you're back in your desk by 7 o'clock, that's not leadership and that's not balancing the scales.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Ashley, Yasmin, and Emilia. Please join me in thanking. Thank you.